When Jake and Sophie set out on a romantic trip to Lake Tahoe, they hoped for a perfect weekend. But one careless suggestion from their friend Emily shatters their trust, revealing their secret desires. Can Jake forgive his betrayal, or will his revenge change their lives forever? The sun was dipping low over the shimmering waters of Lake Tahoe, casting golden streaks across the pine-dotted hills. Jake Harper, 32, leaned against the railing of the wooden deck, taking in the crisp September air. The rustic cabin he and his wife, Sophie, had rented for the weekend stood nestled among towering evergreens, its wide glass windows reflecting the fading light. This was their escape, a long overdue break from the grind of their San Diego lives. Jake, a software engineer, had been buried in deadlines, while Sophie, a graphic designer, had been juggling freelance gigs. The idea of a weekend with no emails, no notifications, just the serenity of the mountains and the company of their closest friends felt like a lifeline. Sophie stepped out onto the deck, her auburn hair catching the breeze as she handed Jake a steaming mug of coffee. "Isn't this perfect?" she said, her hazel eyes sparkling with excitement. She wore a cozy sweater, and her smile was the one Jake had fallen for 6 years ago, warm, effortless, like she could make any moment feel like home. He grinned, pulling her close. "Yeah, babe, you outdid yourself with this place." They'd planned every detail together. The cabin with its stone fireplace, the hiking trails they'd explore, the meals Sophie had spent weeks curating. She loved cooking, and her menu for the weekend, grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet, was a testament to her passion. Jake, less culinary but endlessly supportive, had handled the logistics, booking the cabin, mapping the trails, and ensuring they had enough board games to keep the group entertained. Their friends, Emily and Nate, arrived an hour later, their SUV crunching up the gravel driveway. Emily, 31, burst out of the car, her blonde curls bouncing as she hauled a duffel bag stuffed with blankets and a cooler of craft beers. "This place is insane," she called, her voice carrying the infectious energy that had always made her the life of every gathering. Nate, 33, followed more quietly, his dark eyes scanning the surroundings as he carried their bags. He was the steady counterpoint to Emily's wildfire personality, a high school history teacher who preferred observing to performing. The four had been inseparable since college, their bond forged through late-night study sessions, impromptu road trips, and countless dinners where conversations stretched into the early hours. They weren't just friends, they were family, the kind who knew each other's quirks and histories inside out. This trip was more than a getaway. It was a celebration of a friendship that had weathered job changes, moves, and even Jake and Sophie's wedding 2 years ago. Emily had been Sophie's maid of honor, and Nate had given a heartfelt toast that left half the room in tears. Inside the cabin, the group settled in with the ease of routine. The living room was warm and inviting, with plush couches arranged around a massive stone fireplace. A stack of firewood sat neatly in the corner, and a shelf of well-worn board games promised late-night laughter. Sophie unpacked her ingredients in the kitchen, humming softly, while Emily rifled through her playlist, queuing up mellow, acoustic tracks. Nate and Jake hauled in the last of the bags, joking about who'd win at Scrabble later. "You're going down, Harper," Nate teased, his rare grin breaking through. Jake laughed, clapping him on the shoulder. "Keep dreaming, man." As dusk settled, the four gathered on the deck, watching the sky turn shades of violet and orange. Sophie leaned against Jake, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "This is exactly what we needed," she murmured. He nodded, feeling the weight of the past few months lift. The cabin, the lake, the company, it was perfect. For the first time in weeks, Jake felt like he could breathe. They moved inside for dinner, the scent of Sophie's cooking filling the air. The table was set with care, candles flickering, plates piled high with food, and the Cabernet poured generously. Laughter came easily as they swapped stories. Emily recounting a disastrous camping trip from years ago, Nate poking fun at her tendency to overpack. Jake watched Sophie across the table, her face glowing in the candlelight as she laughed at Emily's exaggerated retelling. He felt a surge of gratitude for this moment, for these people, for the life they'd built. After dinner, they migrated to the living room, sprawling on the couches with fresh glasses of wine. The fireplace crackled, casting a warm glow over the room. Emily, ever the instigator, suggested a round of Never Have I Ever, which drew groans and laughs. "You're gonna regret this," Jake warned, but he was already reaching for the deck of cards she'd pulled out. The game started innocently. Silly confessions about college pranks and embarrassing crushes. But the wine loosened tongues, and the stories grew bolder. As the night deepened, the mood was electric with nostalgia and camaraderie. Jake leaned back, his arm around Sophie, feeling the kind of contentment that comes from being surrounded by people who know you completely. This, he thought, was what the weekend was about: strengthening bonds, making memories, escaping the noise of the world. He had no idea that in just a few hours, a single sentence would shatter that illusion, exposing cracks in the foundation of everything he held dear. The second night at the Lake Tahoe cabin was bathed in a cozy glow, the fireplace casting dancing shadows across the rustic walls. Jake Harper sprawled on the plush couch, a glass of Cabernet in hand, his wife Sophie nestled beside him. Across from them, Emily lounged in an oversized armchair, her legs tucked under a blanket, while Nate sat cross-legged on the floor, nursing his drink. The air was thick with the warmth of crackling logs and the ease of long friendship. The group had spent the day hiking a trail that wound through pine forest to a breathtaking overlook of the lake, their laughter echoing as Emily insisted on goofy group selfies. Now, back at the cabin, the mood was relaxed, the kind of perfect evening where time seemed to slow. Dinner had been another of Sophie's triumphs. Herb-crusted chicken with garlic mashed potatoes, paired with a second bottle of wine that loosened their tongues further. The conversation had meandered from work gripes to childhood memories, each story sparking laughter or playful teasing. Emily, as always, steered the group toward bolder topics, her green eyes glinting with mischief. "Okay, let's spice things up," she said, swirling her glass. "What's the wildest thing you've ever done on a trip?" Jake chuckled, expecting another of Emily's exaggerated tales. "You first, Em. I bet it involves a karaoke bar and bad decisions." The group laughed, but Emily leaned forward, her smile sharper than usual. "Oh, I've got better than that," she said, her voice carrying a playful edge that made Jake's brow quirk. Sophie squeezed his hand, her laugh light but encouraging. "Go on, spill it," she urged. Emily's story was predictably outrageous. A backpacking trip in Mexico, where she'd convinced strangers to join a midnight beach dance party. Nate rolled his eyes, muttering, "You left out the part where you lost your shoes." The room erupted in laughter, and Sophie jumped in with her own story, a hilarious recounting of a road trip where she and Jake got stranded in the desert with a flat tire and a dead phone. Jake grinned, adding details, their banter seamless, their connection palpable. For a moment, everything felt unbreakable. Then, as the laughter faded, Emily leaned forward, her elbow resting on the arm of her chair, her smile turning sly. "Okay, here's a fun idea," she said, her tone deceptively casual. "What if we swap partners for the night? Just, to shake things up." The words hung in the air like a sudden frost, freezing the warmth of the room. Jake's smile faltered, his grip tightening on his glass. He let out a forced laugh, tried to brush it off. "Very funny, Em. You trying to start a reality show?" He glanced at Nate, expecting his friend to shut it down, but Nate just stared at his drink, his jaw tight. Jake's eyes flicked to Sophie, waiting for her to laugh it off too, to call it absurd. Instead, she tilted her head, a curious spark in her eyes. "I mean, it could be kind of fun, right?" she said, her voice light, but with an enthusiasm that hit Jake like a punch. "Something different, His heart stuttered. This wasn't the Sophie he knew, the woman who blushed at innuendos, who valued their private world. The room grew heavy, the crackle of the fire suddenly too loud. Jake forced another laugh, sharper this time. "Okay, you've had too much wine, sophomore." He looked at Nate again, desperate for backup. Nate shifted uncomfortably, his voice low. "Yeah, I don't think that's a great idea." But Emily didn't back down. She swirled her glass, her smile unwavering. "Oh, come on, it's just one night. No strings, just an adventure. Modern couples do this kind of thing, don't they?" Jake's mind reeled. Modern couples? Since when did their group think like that? He and Sophie had built a life on trust, on boundaries they'd never questioned. He glanced at her again, searching for a hint that she was joking, but her eyes held a strange excitement, a curiosity that felt foreign. "Sophie," he said, his voice low. "You're not serious, right?" She hesitated, her smile faltering, but before she could answer, Emily cut in. "Relax, Jake. It's just a thought. No one's forcing anyone." But the damage was done. The air felt thick, suffocating. Jake's chest tightened, a mix of betrayal and disbelief churning inside him. He stood abruptly, setting his glass on the table with a thud. "I need some air," he muttered, avoiding Sophie's gaze as he headed for the door. The cool night air hit him as he stepped onto the deck, but it did little to calm the storm in his head. Behind him, he heard Emily's voice, still light, saying something about exploring boundaries, while Nate's low grumble offered weak resistance. Sophie was silent, and that silence cut deeper than anything. Jake leaned against the railing, staring out at the dark expanse of the lake. The stars above were bright, but they felt distant, mocking. He replayed Sophie's words, kind of fun, something different, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Since when did she want different? Had he missed something, some sign that she wasn't happy? The cabin, once a haven, now felt like a stage for a drama he hadn't signed up for. He didn't know what hurt more, Emily's reckless suggestion or Sophie's willingness to entertain it. Jake stood alone on the deck of the Lake Tahoe cabin, the night air sharp against his skin. The lake stretched out before him, its surface a dark mirror reflecting the scattered stars. The laughter and warmth from earlier felt like a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing unease that twisted in his gut. Emily's reckless suggestion to swap partners echoed in his mind, but it was Sophie's response, her curious, almost eager agreement, that cut the deepest. Jake, 32, had always thought he knew his wife inside out. 6 years together, two as husband and wife, had built what he believed was a rock-solid bond. Now he wasn't so sure. Inside, the cabin's glow spilled through the windows, but Jake couldn't bring himself to go back. He needed space to process the surreal turn the night had taken. His hands gripped the wooden railing, knuckles whitening as he replayed the moment. Sophie's words, "It could be kind of fun, right?" felt like a betrayal, not just of their marriage, but of the trust he'd taken for granted. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe she was caught up in Emily's energy. But the spark in her eyes, that unfamiliar excitement, wasn't something he could dismiss. The door creaked behind him, and Sophie stepped out, her silhouette framed by the warm light from inside. She wrapped her arms around herself, her sweater doing little to shield her from the chill or the tension. "Jake," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "Can we talk?" He didn't turn, his gaze fixed on the lake. "What's there to talk about, Soph? You already said plenty." His tone was sharper than he intended, but he couldn't soften it. "Not yet." She stepped closer, hesitating before placing a hand on his arm. "I didn't mean it like that. I wasn't serious. It was just a moment. I got carried away." Jake finally turned, his blue eyes searching hers for something familiar, something to anchor him. But her expression, guilty, uncertain, only deepened his unease. "Carried away?" he repeated, his voice low but edged with hurt. "You think that's an excuse? You looked at me, saw my face, and still went along with it. You think I could just forget that?" Sophie's eyes glistened, but she held his gaze. "I know I messed up, Jake. I saw how it hurt you, and I hate myself for it. It was stupid, impulsive. I wasn't thinking." Her words came faster now, desperate. "I love you. You know that. This doesn't change how I feel about us." Jake shook his head, stepping back, her hand falling away. "Doesn't it? Because it sure as hell changes how I feel. I thought we were solid, Sophie. Now I'm wondering what else I've missed." The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the distant call of an owl. Inside, Jake could hear Emily's muffled voice, still light and unbothered, as if nothing had happened. Nate's low murmur followed, strained but noncommittal. Jake's jaw tightened. "And Nate," he said, almost to himself. He just sat there, didn't say a damn thing to shut her down. Sophie bit her lip, glancing back toward the cabin. Nate was uncomfortable too. He didn't know what to say. Jake's laugh was bitter. "Uncomfortable? That's what you call it. He's supposed to be my friend. Sophomore friends don't let crap like that slide." He ran a hand through his dark hair, pacing the deck. The betrayal wasn't just Sophie's. It was the whole group, the dynamic he'd trusted for years. He stopped, turning to her. "Be honest with me. Was this the first time you've thought about something like this? Or has this been brewing with you and Emily? Sophie's eyes widened, a flash of panic crossing her face. No, Jake, it's not like that. It was just a dumb moment. I swear. But her hesitation, the split-second delay before answering, planted a seed of doubt. Jake's chest tightened. He wanted to believe her, but the ground beneath him felt unsteady. I need to clear my head, he said, brushing past her toward the trail leading into the woods. Jake, wait, she called, but he didn't stop, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The trail was dark, lit only by slivers of moonlight filtering through the pines. Jake walked without direction, his mind a storm of questions. Had Sophie been unhappy? Had he been blind to it? Their life in San Diego was busy, sure, but he thought they were happy. Date nights at their favorite taco joint, lazy Sundays binge-watching sci-fi shows. When had different become something she craved? And Emily, her suggestion wasn't just a joke. There was intent behind it, a push to cross lines Jake hadn't even considered. He found himself at the lake's edge, the water lapping gently against the shore. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out, half expecting a text from Sophie. Instead, it was Nate. Asterisk, can we talk? I'm sorry about tonight. Asterisk, Jake stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the reply button. He wanted answers, not apologies. He shoved the phone back in his pocket and kept walking, the cool air doing little to calm the fire in his chest. Back at the cabin, Sophie sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Emily approached, her usual confidence dimmed. Hey, he'll cool off, she said, sitting beside her. It was just a silly idea. Sophie's eyes flashed with frustration. Silly? Em, you saw his face. This isn't a game to him. Emily shrugged, unfazed. Maybe it should be. You guys are so serious all the time. Loosen up a bit. Sophie shook her head, standing. You don't get it. I hurt him, and I don't know how to fix it. Upstairs, Nate sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. He'd sent the text to Jake, but got no reply. He knew he should have spoken up, should have stopped Emily's reckless suggestion before it spiraled. But her ideas about open relationships had been a topic before, private conversations he hadn't shared with Jake. Guilt gnawed at him. He needed to come clean, but the thought of facing Jake's anger made his stomach churn. Jake returned to the cabin an hour later, his face unreadable. Sophie stood as he entered, but he held up a hand. Not now, he said, his voice flat. He grabbed a blanket and headed for the guest room, closing the door behind him. The click of the lock felt final, a wall between them. Sophie sank back onto the couch, tears brimming. The trip, meant to strengthen their bonds, had exposed cracks none of them had seen coming. And Jake, lying awake in the dark, wondered if those cracks could ever be repaired. The morning after the fateful night at the Lake Tahoe cabin dawned cold and gray, the mist clinging to the pines like a shroud. Jake Harper sat at the kitchen table, an untouched mug of coffee cooling in his hands. The silence in the cabin was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of floorboards as the others moved upstairs. At 32, Jake had never felt so unmoored. Emily's suggestion to swap partners and Sophie's shocking agreement had shattered the illusion of their perfect getaway. Worse, the betrayal had sparked doubts about everything: his marriage, his friendships, his own judgment. He'd barely slept, his mind replaying the moments Sophie's eyes lit up with curiosity, a look he couldn't reconcile with the woman he thought he knew. Jake's phone sat on the table, its screen dark but heavy with possibility. Last night, after storming out to the lake, he'd done something he never imagined. He'd checked Sophie's phone. It wasn't a habit. He'd always trusted her, but the sting of her words drove him to it. What he found was worse than he'd feared. Months of texts between Sophie and Emily, buried in their chat history, revealed casual discussions about open relationships and trying something new. Nothing explicit, no plans, but enough to show Sophie had entertained the idea long before last night. The discovery was a knife to the gut, confirming that her response wasn't just a drunken whim. It was a glimpse into a part of her she'd kept hidden. Sophie appeared in the kitchen, her face pale, eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching the sleeves of her sweater. "Jake," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk now?" He didn't look up, his fingers tightening around the mug. "What's there to say, Sophie?" "I saw the texts." Her breath caught, and she took a step forward, her hands outstretched. "You went through my phone?" Her voice trembled, a mix of guilt and defensiveness. Jake's eyes finally met hers, cold and steady. "Yeah, I did, and I wish I hadn't." You've been talking about this stuff with Emily for months. Months, sophomore. While I thought we were fine, Sophie sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. It wasn't like that. It was just talk, Jake. Stupid, hypothetical stuff. I never meant to act on it. Her voice cracked, tears spilling over. I love you. I'd never do anything to hurt us. Jake's laugh was hollow. You already did. You sat there, in front of me, and said it could be fun. You saw my face, and you kept going. That's not love. That's disrespect. Sophie flinched, but he wasn't done. And Emily? She's been pushing this. Or was Nate in all this? He just let it happen. As if summoned, Nate appeared at the top of the stairs, his expression grim. Emily trailed behind, her usual confidence replaced by unease. Jake, I texted you last night, Nate said, his voice low. I'm sorry. I should have stopped it. Jake stood, his chair scraping against the floor. Yeah, you should have. You're supposed to be my friend, Nate. You saw me falling apart and said nothing. Nate looked away, guilt etched into his features. Emily stepped forward, her tone defiant. Jake, it was a joke. You're blowing this way out of proportion. A joke. Jake's voice rose, sharp but controlled. You suggested we throw away our relationships for a night, and my wife went along with it. That's not a joke, Emily. That's you crossing a line you had no right to cross. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over them. Sophie reached for his hand, but he pulled away. I need time, he said, his voice quieter now, but firm. I can't be here right now. Jake spent the day alone, walking the trails they'd explored so happily just yesterday. The beauty of the lake felt mocking now, its serenity at odds with the chaos in his heart. He didn't want to lash out or make a scene. That wasn't him. But he couldn't let this slide. The betrayal wasn't just Sophie's. It was Emily's instigation, Nate's silence, the group's complicity in letting the moment spiral. By afternoon, he'd made a decision. His revenge wouldn't be loud or destructive. It would be final, a clean break to protect what was left of his dignity. That evening, as the group packed to leave, Jake called them into the living room. The air was thick with tension, suitcases half-zipped by the door. He stood by the fireplace, his face calm but resolute. I'm done, he said simply. Emily, Nate, our friendship is over. You crossed a line. I can't trust you anymore. He turned to Sophie, his voice softening but unwavering. And Soph, I found your text with Emily. Months of you two talking about new experiences. I thought we were building a life together, but you were dreaming of something else. He pulled out his phone, showing the screenshots to the group. Sophie gasped, tears streaming down her face. Emily's mouth opened, but no words came. Nate stared at the floor. I'm filing for divorce. Jay continued, his voice steady. Not because I hate you, Sophie, but because I can't live wondering what else you're hiding. I deserve better. He grabbed his bag and walked out, the door closing with a soft thud that echoed louder than any shout. The drive back to San Diego was silent, the weight of his words lingering. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, sobbing quietly, but Jake kept his eyes on the road. He wasn't punishing her out of spite. He was choosing himself. 6 weeks had passed since the Lake Tahoe cabin trip, and Jake Harper stood on the rooftop of his new San Francisco apartment, the city's fog curling around the skyline. At 32, he traded the familiar hum of San Diego for a fresh start, a decision born from the wreckage of a weekend that was meant to celebrate love and friendship. Emily's reckless suggestion to swap partners and Sophie's inexplicable agreement had shattered Jake's trust, exposing fault lines in his marriage and his closest friendships. The discovery of Sophie and Emily's months-long texts about open relationships had been the final straw, leading Jake to walk away, not with anger, but with a quiet resolve to reclaim his life. After that final morning at the cabin, where Jake confronted the group with the damning screenshots, he'd driven back to San Diego in near silence, Sophie's muffled sobs the only sound in the car. He'd announced his decision to end his friendship with Emily and Nate and to file for divorce, not as a spectacle, but as a boundary. His revenge was simple, severing ties with those who betrayed him and choosing self-respect over resentment. The divorce papers were filed within days, a clean cut to a life he could no longer trust. Sophie's pleas for forgiveness followed, but Jake needed distance to heal, to rediscover who he was without the shadow of betrayal. In San Francisco, Jake was carving out a new chapter. He'd landed a senior role at a tech startup, where long hours coding felt like a refuge. His evenings were filled with small, deliberate steps toward rebuilding. Runs along the Embarcadero, dinners at quirky Mission District eateries, and the occasional board game night with new colleagues. Therapy, suggested by a coworker, became a lifeline. In those sessions, Jake unpacked the hurt, not just Sophie's betrayal, but his own blind spots. He'd been so consumed by work that he'd missed Sophie's growing restlessness. While he didn't excuse her actions, he began to see their marriage as a shared failure, not just hers. It didn't erase the pain, but it gave him clarity. Sophie, meanwhile, stayed in San Diego, grappling with the consequences of her impulsiveness. The divorce, though expected, left her hollow. Mutual friends, learning of the cabin incident, distanced themselves, their trust in her shaken. Emily's role in the fiasco didn't help. Her carefree attitude now seemed reckless, costing her the respect of their circle. Sophie started therapy, driven by a need to understand why she'd entertained Emily's idea. She realized she'd been chasing a fleeting thrill, mistaking it for fulfillment. Painting, a passion she'd set aside during her marriage, became her outlet. Each canvas was a step toward reclaiming herself, though the guilt of hurting Jake lingered. Emily faced her own fallout in Los Angeles. Nate, tired of her boundary pushing, ended their relationship after the trip. He'd reached out to Jake with a heartfelt letter, admitting his failure to intervene that night and his discomfort with Emily's open ideas. Jake hadn't responded, but the gesture stayed with him. Emily, now isolated, struggled to maintain her social circle. Her once charming boldness was now seen as irresponsibility, a lesson in the cost of careless words. One foggy evening, Jake stood on his rooftop, a coffee in hand, watching the city lights flicker. The ache of Tahoe was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He thought of Sophie, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance. He didn't wish her ill. He just couldn't rebuild what they'd lost. A text from a new friend, inviting him to a jazz club, buzzed in his pocket. He smiled, replying quickly. Life was unfolding, and he was ready to embrace it. In San Diego, Sophie sat in her studio, a half-finished painting before her. Therapy had helped her see her mistakes, but healing was slow. She hadn't reached out to Jake, respecting his boundaries, but she held a fragile hope that one day they might talk. Not as partners, but as people who'd once meant everything to each other. The cabin, now a distant memory, stood empty, its walls holding the echoes of a night that changed them all. For Jake, it was a painful but necessary end. For Sophie, a hard-earned lesson in accountability. And in the quiet of their separate lives, both found the first sparks of redemption.